Hello, welcome back. So today I'm going to be discussing a quite technical issue within classical and Marxist political economy, which is that of the equalization of profit rates across industries. Okay, especially as it relates to a broader theory of competition in capitalist societies. So I'm going to be defending in particular the theory of real competition, which is a synthesis made by economist Anwar Shaikh of the insights into competition of the classical economists and of Marx and of other economists as well. I'm going to be defending this theory from the attacks of another economist working within the Marxist tradition, which is Paul Cockshott, who has made a video some months ago and who also wrote a short piece on this particular issue. And I'm going to be defending this theory, which is a theory that, again, I'm going to stress this, is a theory that flows naturally from the works of the classical economists and in particular from the works of Marx, and it is a development of these insights and a synthesis of these insights into a more comprehensive and a far better and more systematic and more systematized theory of competition. Now, why is this topic important? Before I start discussing anything, it is important because competition is a theoretical foundation for many of the things that we discuss in my videos, and many of the things that are discussed within the field of economics. And it is of particular relevance for theories like the labor theory of value, the theory of exploitation, and many other questions of this nature. And it is important because if there are certain patterns of competition that we can say exist, then we can use these patterns as the framework from which to develop, higher level theories. And again, the labor theory of value, which is one that I've discussed plenty of times in this channel, draws a lot from this particular subject. So there's a lot at stake here. Now, Paul Cockshott generally agrees with Anwar Shaikh on many things, as far as I know, but this is a particular issue where they disagree and where Paul Cockshott has made certain quite strong allegations, in my opinion, against Anwar Shaikh's notions. And the reason for this is that Paul Cockshott believes that the labor theory of value doesn't necessitate, and this is actually something that is untrue, an equalization of profit rates. So the labor theory of value doesn't necessitate this, and he believes that the equalization of profit rates is untrue and it is something that doesn't exist, and that it shouldn't exist, basically, given the laws of competition and the laws of economics that he believes apply to capitalist societies. Now, this is important because the version of Marx's labor theory of value depends on profit rate equalization, because it depends on the notion of prices of production, which I've discussed plenty of times in this channel as well. And prices of production are prices that reflect an equalized profit rate across industries, and these are what we in the labor theory of value, that is the classical theory of value, and then the Marxist labor theory of value, as described by Marx and as developed by people working within this tradition, and especially Anwar Shaikh. This particular theory is a theory that says that it is prices of production that are the centers of gravity of market prices. And the reason why this is the case is because profit rates tend to get equalized, and the outflows and inflows of capital from the industries, in order to achieve this outcome of equalized profit rates, produce movements in prices that bring them together and bring them closer to this center of gravity, that is the price of production. Now, we observe empirically that this is the case. So empirically we have observed that prices of production are indeed the centers of gravity of market prices, using cross-sectional data in particular, and I have already shown empirical evidence in some videos that I made in the past, and this is generally something that empirically we do see. So we expect there to be an equalization of profit rates across industries. However, the theory of real competition doesn't propose, doesn't present an equalization of profit rates as being, let's say, achieved through the equalization of average profit rates. Okay, the profit rates that get equalized are not average profit rates, and this is something that Paul Cockshott agrees with as well. Okay, so Anwar Shaikh and Paul Cockshott agree on this particular subject, but Anwar Shaikh goes a little bit further and he says that, okay, average profit rates don't get equalized, but regulating profit rates, which are the profit rates that are earned, okay, by the best generally available method of production in a given industry, okay, what we can call the regulating capital of a given industry, those are the ones that get equalized. Okay, and I'm going to be discussing this a little bit more with a little bit more detail, because I know this sounds a little bit abstract at first, but in order for you to understand, okay, it's necessary that I explain it a little bit further, especially if you don't have any previous knowledge on this. So Paul Cockshott denies this, and he's going to make some criticisms that I'm now going to discuss. But first, let me say a little bit about this theory, so that we are all, more or less on the same ground. This theory, okay, as I was saying, proposes that average profit rates are not going to get equalized because, okay, there are different cost structures between capitals within an industry, because different capitals are of different vintages. Okay, some are older, some are younger. They therefore have different costs. There are other reasons, okay, not just the vintage of the capital, but many other things, and they have different costs. And if there is an equalization of prices across the same good, okay, or similar goods, okay, and this is something that Paul Cockshott is going to criticize, but this is something that we do in fact have not only theoretical reasons to believe, but also empirical reasons to, and I'm going to be discussing this in a second. If this is the case, then the profit rates, which are a function of both the price or the unit revenues and the costs, the unit costs, if these profit rates, okay, reflect these different costs, then they're not going to get equalized. Okay, so the average profit rate is clearly not going to get equalized between industries, because within industries there are capitals operating with different with a wide range of profit rates due to the fact that there are different costs. Now, what about the prices? Okay, what about the prices? Now, theoretically, we can see that there are good reasons to believe that prices for similar commodities get equalized, because, okay, generally when there is competition between businesses there within an industry, there is going to be a tendency for consumers to flow to the businesses that sell at a lower price. Okay, similar or the same goods at a lower price. And normally the businesses that can do this are the businesses that are able to, and the ability to do so depends on their costs. So if they have lower costs, they're going to be able to sell lower. And this is in business, okay, this is a practice that is very common. Okay, this is common from almost the beginning of business existing, okay, which is, okay, businesses drive down costs in order to lower prices, in order to gain a bigger market share, and in order to outcompete their competitors, obviously. And in the business literature, you can see countless work on this, theoretical and empirical as well. Okay, so this is something that theoretically we can see that is going to be the case, because, okay, if businesses, okay, that sell lower attract more customers, then the businesses that sell higher are going to either run out of business, so they're going to disappear from the market, or they're going to have to adjust their prices. Okay, but of course this is not going to be an adjustment that is done immediately and it's perfect. Okay, of course not. We're not talking about a theory of competition that discusses this within this static and with this perfect framework. We're talking about real competition, and in real competition things get equalized turbulently and tendentially. Okay, and in the data, okay, we can see this if for each commodity, instead of there being a single price, there is a dispersion of prices with a big mode, with a prominent mode. And this is something that has indeed been observed for goods of the same nature, or actually the same good, okay, sold in different locations, in different states, and so on and so forth. And here I can direct you in particular to the work of a professor of mine at NYU, Guido Mencio, who is a really, I would say, a brilliant researcher and a person that I have a lot of respect for. I took a course with him, and I couldn't be more happy that I did. And he has worked with other researchers on the particular subject of price dispersion, and he has indeed found that okay, there's a dispersion of prices, but there is a mode, and then he explains this with theories of imperfect competition and so on and so forth. So then the theoretical framework is completely different. I'm going to link you to one of the papers, but there are many other papers if you want to read them. They are out there, and the empirical evidence is there. Generally, there tends to be a mode. Okay, so this is in favor of what I was saying, of a tendential equalization of the prices for the same or similar goods. And so Paul Cockshott's criticisms here really are not important, because this is something that not only theoretically but empirically we do observe. So this is the first criticism that Paul Cockshott makes to the theory of regulating capitals and to the broader general theory of real competition. Now he also makes here another criticism, which is that Anwar Shaikh is assuming no patent rights. Okay, but before I introduce this criticism, let me say a little bit about profit rate equalization. Okay, because if profit rate equalization doesn't occur at the level of average profit rates, we need to have a theory of where it does indeed occur, and where it does occur is at the level of regulating profit rates. Okay, what we call regulating profit rates, and profit rates in the regulating sense are the profit rates that are earned, okay, by the best generally reproducible method of production within an industry, okay, within a market. And this is known in the business literature, and this is something that is discussed, okay, because generally within an industry there are some methods of production that are not available to new investors, and there are some that are available to new investors, and the ones that are the ones that generally tend to see the inflows and the outflows of capital that produce the equalization of profit rates. So since at the average level we do not see this, we need to find it in a different level, and we actually do find it in the level of regulating profit rates. Now, why regulating profit rates are important? Because they basically are the ones that regulate the inflows and the outflows of capital from a given industry into and from a given industry, and they are the ones that produce the movement in the industry's price in order to make it so that it gets turbulently let's say regulated by the industry's price of production. So this is again really important for the theory of the labor theory of value. Now, why is this the case? Because the inflows and the outflows of capital from that industry move the profit rate of that industry in such a manner that makes it equal to the profit rate of the regulating capital of all other industries in an economy. And this is why generally in the general economy we observe that relative prices, market prices, are determined by the relative prices of production of that economy. Okay, so what is the criticism that Paul Cockshott makes? Well, Paul Cockshott says, look, Anwar Shaikh here he's not considering the fact that there are patent rights, that there are barriers to entry and economic modes. This is how it's known in the business literature, to the production of a given commodity in a given market. Now, this is indeed the case that these things exist, but this is something that Anwar Shaikh does indeed take into consideration. And it is Paul Cockshott the one that is not giving us a full sense of what this theory is, and he's ignoring this really important part, because this is a part that is fairly well incorporated into the theory. Why? Because of course patent rights are going to limit the generally available methods of production within a given industry, because if a given method of production has a patent, then there's not going to be any inflows or outflows of capital in that particular method of production. But that doesn't mean that there are no inflows and outflows in the industry. There are still going to be inflows and outflows in the industry, but in different methods. Okay, let's consider silicone. Okay, for this for producing, I don't know, cooking utensils. Okay, maybe a given method of production produces a particular kind of silicone that is patented. But that is not the only silicone that is there in the market. There are many other silicones in the market, and the silicones that have a method of production that is reproducible are going to be the ones that are going to reflect this best generally available method of production. It is in the definition of the method of production that is regulating that it is generally available and reproducible. Okay, so we are not abstracting from this particular notion. Okay, and even if we consider patent rights and economic modes, okay, these things don't last forever. There's something that in the business literature is known pretty well, okay, and this is that these things don't last forever. Competition is always going to end up eroding whatever barriers to entry you produced for your particular method of production, and you're going to still have to innovate, find other ways to compete, etc., because that is what competition does. That is what competition does, especially if we consider the long run. Okay, in the short run, maybe you can get some short run advantages over your competitors, some short run higher earnings, but we're talking about the long run. Okay, and in the long run, this is what we expect to see in the data, an equalization of profit rates. And in the short run, we expect to be volatility. We expect there to be some higher, some industry that earn a higher profit rate, some industries that earn a lower profit rate, and all of these factors that are disturbance factors, okay? Cyclical factors. Now, of course, this is not ignored in the theory. So Paul Cockshott here is wrong again, okay? This is not ignored in the theory. It is well incorporated, and it follows naturally from the theory. So there is nothing here to be criticized. And then he says that Anwar Shaikh is modifying. Okay, Anwar Shaikh is modifying the theory of the labor theory of value, and in particular the theory of equalization of profit rates, to one where it is not average profit rates but regulating profit rates that get equalized. And this is again not true. Okay, this is not true because yes, okay, in the literature after Marx, plenty of Marxist economists have considered only average profit rates, and when evidence has come on average profit rates, they have been met with empirical failures because average profit rates don't get equalized for reasons that I already discussed. However, in the works of Marx, a close reading would already tell us that there are strong reasons to believe that Marx himself was proposing a kind of theory of competition of regulating capitals, being the ones subject to the equalization of profit rates. And Anwar Shaikh is smart enough to see this in Marx's works and in the works of other economists and to put it together into the theory of real competition. So he's not really making a modification, he's just extending what had already been said. Okay, and okay, depending on how you define modification, you could argue this is the case. I don't care. But the important thing is that Anwar Shaikh here is not making some kind of ad hoc implementation to the theory. He's actually developing the theory to something that makes a lot of sense and to something that, if you make a close reading, is already present in the writings of the people he's taking this theory from. Okay, so then let's go to the empirical part, okay? Because theoretically we already see that there are good reasons to believe that this is a strong theory and that these are the grounds on which a labor theory of value is to be supported, and Marx believed that these are the grounds on which a labor theory of value is to be supported. Now, what does the empirical evidence say? Because the empirical evidence is of extreme relevance in any economic questions, in my opinion. The Austrians will tell you, some Austrians will tell you otherwise, but this is what I believe. Okay? Now, Paul Cockshott here has some criticisms of the evidence that Anwar Shaikh has provided, but my argument is going to be that Paul Cockshott hasn't engaged, okay, honestly with this question. He only limits himself to an informal visual inspection of a couple of graphs that Anwar Shaikh gives. He ignores everything else, and most importantly, he ignores the formal econometric testing of this particular question, which is the really important part. So he has built, okay, in his video, he built a sort of straw man that he could easily attack and then, claim that this is why the theory of regulating capitals being subject to equalization of profit rates is not, it's unsound, okay? It's not only that it is not valid logically, but that it's also not borne out by the data. So let's consider what are his criticisms. Okay, so firstly, he presents us a notion of the incremental rate of profit, which is the rate of profit that Anwar Shaikh and other researchers, including myself, I'm working on this issue for my master's thesis, and I'm using this particular definition. But although Paul Cockshott is going to misinterpret, but let's just keep it anyway. He's going to claim that the expression, okay, of the incremental rate of return, which is the approximation to the regulating rate of return in a given industry, to the regulating rate of return is the same as the rate of profit. Okay, he's going to claim that this is the difference, okay, the first difference in the series of profits over the first difference in the series of capital stock. He's going to say that this is what the incremental rate of return is, and you had there the formula, okay, that I presented, and what he's telling us here is basically that the incremental rate of return is the division of two I0 variables, okay, and two I0 variables, what it means is that they are two variables that are differenced and that are stationary, okay, so they don't need to be differenced anymore in order to be stationary, because they're already stationary. But this is not the case, because the incremental rate of return is not defined in this way. It is defined by the change in profits, okay, from one year to another by investment lagged 1 year. And investment lagged 1 year implies that we are not dealing with an I0 variable, because investment, as measured in the data, is called gross fixed capital formation, and it is an I1 variable, okay? It is not stationary. It is sort of a random walk, okay? And this is some technical time series econometric jargon that I'm using here, but anything that you want to ask, you are always free to ask me, okay? I'm going to be, talking about some technical things here, but you can still ask me if there's something that was left unclear. So this is how the rate of profit, the incremental rate of profit is actually defined, okay? And Anwar Shaikh provides a really, I would say, compelling case, both algebraically and theoretically, for why this is the best approximation that we currently have for the regulating rate of profit of an industry. Okay, Paul Cockshott, of course, completely ignores this. He just goes to that particular expression, and that expression he misinterprets it with this particular question of the change in capital in the capital stock from 1 year to another being the same as investment lagged 1 year, which is not. Okay, but this is a minor point. Okay, because then he's going to claim, he's going to present his first criticism to the empirical evidence presented by Anwar Shaikh, which is a criticism that left me, really impressed, because he's, and I'm not kidding, okay, he's accusing Anwar Shaikh of dishonesty for presenting, okay, a graph with average profit rates and another one with incremental profit rates that have different y-axis scaling, okay, they have different scales in the y-axis. And this, he's going to claim, is dishonest because, as you can see in the screen right now, okay, these are two of the graphs that Anwar Shaikh presents, and on the top you can see the average profit rates, and you can see that they are, as you can see in this graph, further spread out from each other than the incremental rate of profits, which are the ones in the bottom graph. Now he's going to claim that this is dishonest because the increments in the y scale, okay, of the incremental rates of profit are of 0.2 in particular. We can see that the increments are of 0.2, and in the other ones are of 0.05. Now, this to him is a dishonest presentation of these graphs, because if he what he does is he rescales the y-axis of the average profit rates and then concludes that we can see that now these ones, the average profit rates, look further closer together than the incremental rates of profit. And this is, first of all, a subjective interpretation, because to me, they still look further apart than the incremental rates of profit. But second of all, this, implies that he believes that Anwar Shaikh is doing this purposefully in order to make those the average profit rates look further apart than the incremental rates of profit. And this is not the case, because if we turn the page, okay, literally if we turn the page from the page 303 where Anwar Shaikh presents those two graphs that Paul Cockshott is talking about to the page 304, we can see that Anwar Shaikh presents again two graphs, one on the top with the average profit rates only in the manufacturing sector, so for all the different parts of the manufacturing sector, and in the bottom graph the incremental rates of profit in the manufacturing sector, and that the Y scale, okay, follows, okay, a scaling that is of a relationship from one graph to the other completely opposite to the one that we saw before. So here the increments in the average profit rates in the Y scale of in the Y axis of the average profit rates are of 10. Okay, we can see that we go from 0% to 10% to 20%, and we can see that in the incremental rates of profit, these increments in the Y-axis are of 0, are in this particular 5, because we go from 0% to 5% to 10%, okay, and so on. Now, this, as you can see, is the reverse relationship between the Y scales of these two graphs than before. And still we can see the same pattern that Anwar Shaikh was talking about, that ones are more clustered together than the other. So if Anwar Shaikh was being dishonest, why would he, okay, do this? Why would he in one page present this in the particular way that Paul Cockshott is saying, in order to make them seem further apart from each other, and in the next page reverse that particular relationship? If he was being dishonest, he should have gone all the route into dishonesty, right? Because otherwise it doesn't make any sense, okay? Especially with a book of this nature, you know, this is not any book. This has been published by Oxford University Press, so this is not any book, okay? Now, of course, this is a really nonsensical criticism for two main reasons. First of all, because even when he does the rescaling of the y-axis of the average profit rates in the first graph that we saw, as you can see in the screen, they still look further apart from each other. But okay, this is just a subjective thing. This is just a subjective thing, so it doesn't even matter, because what really matters, and what he's ignoring here, is that what we are looking for is a formal test. We're not just looking at a visual inspection, because through visual inspection you could perfectly say, no, I think that these are farther apart from each other, or no, I think that they are closer together. What we are looking for is not that, and this is certainly not what Shaikh is limiting himself to. Okay, this is kids play. Okay, this is something that is completely informal. Visual inspection of these graphs don't tell us if these profit rates get equalized or not. Okay, and this is something that anyone that has studied time series econometrics should be able to tell you, that just by inspection of a graph, you don't necessarily know what's going on in that graph. So what really matters is what the formal test tells us. And what the formal test tells us is that the average profit rates don't get equalized, but the incremental rates of profit do. So even if you would say that it looks like in the graph, if you rescale the y-axis, the average profit rates look closer together, it doesn't matter in reality, because what we're looking for is not this particular visual inspection, but what we're looking for is what the formal test tells us. Okay, and the formal test is done first of all by calculating the difference of each of these profit rates from the average, and then, okay, and there are many techniques that we can use. We can use co-integration techniques and so on and so forth. But normally, okay, what is done in the literature is an autoregressive process of first order, okay, where you can test whether the difference, so the difference between each of these series from the average is the one that is being tested with the autoregressive process, and what you test is whether the constant is or is not statistically significantly different from 0. And this is something that, again, Paul Cockshott is ignoring, and this is something that Anwar Shaikh presents a couple of pages afterwards, after the presentation of these graphs, and this is something that is done, okay, in the literature, and that I have done myself as well, and that actually does tell us whether or not these profit rates get equalized or not in the long run. Now, he could have even been a little bit more honest in his criticism, because if you really want to see more closely whether or not these profit rates get equalized, okay, let's say you want to keep it just to the visual inspection, you don't want to do the formal test. Okay, you could keep it to the visual inspection by looking at the time series of each of the rate of profit difference from the average rate of profit. And how do you do this? Okay, you put a graph with all of these differences, and as you can see, okay, I'm going to present the example of my particular data for Spain. You can see that if you look at the average rates of at the difference of the average rates of profit from the average of those average rates of profit, you can see that these ones are further apart from zero than you would expect if there was equalization, and that they actually have, some of them even seem to have some kind of a trend upward and some kind of a trend downward, okay, from zero, and that these ones, okay, that these profit rates don't indeed show at that individual level an equalization. However, if you look at these profit rates for this same time series, okay, for these same 14 industries, but in the case of the incremental rates of return, what you see is that they do in fact are centered on this zero, okay, these differences are very close to zero, and that these differences don't show any particular trend, okay, so you could fairly assume that the average of this series are going to be zero, so that they statistically, okay, there's not going to be a constant coefficient that is statistically significantly different from zero, okay. So this is something that Paul Cockshott is ignoring, and this would have been a better point to make, okay, but Paul Cockshott clearly didn't want to make this point, because if he had made this point, we would have seen that his dishonest presentation of the graphs was actually not telling us what he thought it was telling us, which is that Anwar Shaikh was trying to say that incremental profit rates are closer together, but actually if you rescale the y-axis of the average profit rates look closer together. No, if you look at each individual profit rate and their deviation from the average, you can see that the average profit rates don't tend to get equalized, but incremental profit rates do tend to get equalized. And if you then go to the formal empirical testing route and you run these regressions that I was talking about before with the autoregressive process, although again you could use co-integration techniques and many other techniques, you would in fact find the same thing, okay, that formally these things get equalized. So now we turn to the last criticism that Paul Cockshott makes to the empirical evidence presented by Anwar Shaikh, and this one, okay, contains a little bit of truth, but it also contains a lot of untrue implications. Okay, so first of all, he claims that Anwar Shaikh has redefined what equalization means to just a crossing of the time series of these particular rates, but this is not true. Okay, the crossing of the rates does in fact can tell us things about equalization. Okay, but it's not what equalization means. Equalization for Shaikh, as for anyone that understands what equalization, tendential turbulent equalization means, is, okay, a process by which in the long run the difference between two series tends to be equal to zero in the long run. Okay, and the crossings are important because the crossings tell us, okay, that these are indeed moving relatively close together, because if they are crossing, they are at least somewhat close. Okay, they are at least somewhat close. Although they need not be close, as I'm going to show in a second. So then what is the criticism here? Okay, so first of all, he presents this straw man that equalization means crossings in this series, and then he critiques this by claiming that, okay, this is just an statistical artifact that Anwar Shaikh is presenting here because he's taking the first difference, okay, of the profit series and of the capital stock series, and he's dividing it together, and what he's getting basically is a derivative, okay, of all of these rates that basically, of course, is going to show that the profit rates cross, because if you subject, okay, any given time series actually to differentiation of first order, okay, it is going to actually be, centered around 0. Not necessarily, okay, because there are different time series, okay, with different patterns, okay. But if you take, let's say, a random walk, okay, and you subject it to first differentiation, what you're going to get is white noise that moves with average 0, okay. And if you take that for different random walks, you're going to get crossings between the first differences of the random walks. And what he presents there is what you have there, this particular graphical representation of this, which is, a very simple representation. But what he's doing there is presenting this with total profits, okay. But we're not talking about total profits. We're talking about the profit rate. We're not talking about total profits, okay. And the profit rate is not just total profits. Okay, and other thing that he's doing there is he's presenting us two series of profit that are already very close together. So when you take the first derivative of both, they are indeed going to close. They are going to close because they were already very close together. Okay, but this need not be the case. Okay, this need not be the case. And why am I saying this? Okay, because if we consider the case with profit rates rather than with only profit, okay, we can look at the following thing. Okay. And this is the argument that I'm going to make. I'm going to make the argument that, okay, when you differentiate a time series, you are indeed going to get two time series. You are indeed going to get more crossings between the series. Okay, that is something that is true, but you're not necessarily going to get that they get equalized under the definition that I'm using, which is long run convergence to a given common point. Okay. Now, how can we see this? Okay, if we look at the graph here that I have for the average profit rates in the Spanish industries, okay, in the 14 Spanish industries, you can see here that they indeed look somewhat spread out, and you can see that there is one which is the profit rate for the industry I, which is higher up here. Is high up. Is this one that it's in yellow and has stars, and you can see that it's pretty high and that it has some kind of a tendency to go upward, at least in the period from 2012 to 2020. And you can also see that there is in the bottom of the graph another profit rate that is very far apart from this one, which is the profit rate for industry L, okay, which is here in blue and has triangles pointing down, and this one you can see is very far apart from industry I. So if we take, okay, the first difference of these two profit rates, which are not clearly tendentially equalized, okay, these two profit rates clearly don't show any tendency to get equalized. If you take the first difference of these two rates, what you expect to see, okay, is some crossing, and as you can see in the graph here that I have, where I have isolated the first difference of these two particular profit rates, okay, of industry I and of industry L, what you can see here is that they do indeed cross, okay, because of the different of the first difference that we have applied to the series, but you can see that they still don't show equalization. So they cross only a little bit at the beginning of the series, as you can see in the graph, but they do not indeed show, still don't show a tendential equalization. So we are not really doing anything here, especially because what we are doing is not taking the first derivative of the series of the average profit rates. What we are talking about with incremental rates of profit is an object that is completely different. Okay? It's an object that is different and that theoretically it represents a different thing. And if we look at the incremental rates of profit, however, of these two industries, we can see that and we isolate those two industries, we can see that the incremental rate of profit does show indeed these two rates being very close together, crossing, okay, as we would expect, and tendentially being equalized. Okay, and if we run a formal test, we will see indeed that those two profit rates, the incremental profit rates for these two industries, get equalized, but we will not see that the average profit rates for these two industries get equalized, okay, as we can clearly see just from the very beginning of the simple graph. Okay, so what this shows basically is that Paul Cockshott here thinks he's presenting something that is not taken under into consideration and he thinks that this is somewhat discrediting of the empirical evidence, but it's not. Okay? It is not discrediting of the empirical evidence. First of all, because we're not just limiting ourselves to equalization, meaning crossings. Second of all, because we're not just limiting ourselves to a visual inspection of the graphs. And third of all, because if we actually do the formal empirical testing of this theory, of these rates of profit, of the incremental rates of profit, we will see that they get equalized, but this cannot be said about the average rates of profit. So when Paul Cockshott says that there's no empirical evidence because this paper written by Zachariah in 2006 tells us that they don't show a clear tendency to get equalized, he's right, but he's talking about average profit rates, not about incremental profit rates. So, and this is something that Anwar Shaikh agrees with him on the average profit rate side. Okay, so this is pretty much everything that I had to say. Okay, so just to conclude, okay, it seems to me that this is a really clear pattern that we observe in different countries and for a wide range of years. Okay, and it seems to be a really persistent pattern. Okay, that profit rates do indeed get equalized in the long run for the regulating capitals of the industries of a given economy, following, of course, a capitalist mode of production. And this is something that is indeed a good, not only theoretical but empirically, it is a good foundation for the labor theory of value presented in Marx, which he takes again from the classical economists, and particularly this notion of price of production is taken from David Ricardo. And basically what we have here is a really clear case of this being a sound, okay, and a valid framework from which to study, okay, further economic questions. And you can see here with the theory of real competition and in general with the theoretical enterprise, okay, of that Anwar Shaikh develops in his works and he synthesizes in his 2016 book. Okay, what we can see is a set of theories that naturally follow from each other and that give us, okay, a very nice and a very consistent and a very comprehensive understanding of almost all of the patterns that we see in micro and in macroeconomics. Okay, of course there's things that need to be developed, and even within this topic we could still improve the empirical evidence on profit rate equalization, okay? Because if we want to get a better understanding of whether or not the profit rates of regulating capitals get equalized, we could be looking, okay, if the data is available, and this is something that further research needs to be done on, to actually testing on the best generally reproducible conditions of a given industry. We could indeed try to go directly into each industry and look at those particular conditions and the profits earned by those particular businesses representing this best generally available method of production. But since we don't have that data, we need to approximate it with the incremental rate of return, and the incremental rate of return is a good approximation. So it already tells us a lot of things, and this is something that has been defended, okay, theoretically and algebraically. And I would say that of course there's room for improvement, like in everything there's room for improvement, but what we already have is a pretty solid theoretical and empirical foundation from which to work on. And yes, with that being said, I'm going to end the video here. I will see you next time.